Shannon Sharpe goes off on Nique after she clowns him on stage. What happens when a legend who built his empire on strength, discipline, and confidence becomes the punchline of a joke he once laughed off? Shannon Sharpe, the former NFL titan turned media heavyweight, is now watching his million-dollar brand collapse one headline, one joke, and one bad decision at a time. It started off like comedy, a funny jab during Nique's stand-up. The crowd roared. Shannon sat quiet, but beneath the laughter was a warning that came full circle. She wasn't just cracking jokes, she was delivering a prophecy. And now, that prophecy has hit him like a truck. This is no longer about an aging football player fumbling through his love life. It's about a man once considered untouchable being dragged through the mud by a scandal that's exposing not just his choices, but his character. Nique, who once sat across from Shannon on Club Shay Shay giving him real talk, had warned him, "Stop chasing women who are in it for the bag. Find someone real, someone grown." But Shannon back then laughed in her face, playing it cool like nothing could touch him. Now that laughter's gone. And Nique, she's not done talking. While Shannon battles a $50 million lawsuit from a 19-year-old OnlyFans model, while his $100 million podcast deal hangs by a thread, and while his name becomes internet fodder, the people he thought would have his back are nowhere to be found. Nique didn't betray him, she just put a mirror to his face. Fans have questions. Why is a man willing to throw millions at a stranger yet hesitating to support his own daughter's wedding? Why are racially charged texts and strange baby gravy comments leaking? And why do they paint a picture of a man spiraling, not standing tall? Worse, even those closest to him say, this wasn't an ambush. It was a slow crash everyone saw coming. From Cat Williams to Lil Yachty, people tried to talk sense into Shannon, but he brushed them off. Now even his once loyal sponsors are stepping back, afraid to be burned by the fallout. The truth is, this isn't just a Hollywood scandal, it's a cautionary tale. About ignoring good advice, about chasing the wrong things, and about the price of thinking you're too big to fall. Shannon Sharpe might still think he's in control, but the world sees something else, a man caught in the very trap he was warned about. And as Nique turns his downfall into stand-up gold, one question echoes louder than all the jokes. Is Shannon Sharpe finally facing the one opponent he can't outrun himself? What happened in Shannon's past that shaped this downfall, and how did a football legend fall into such chaos? Stay tuned as we uncover the early life and foundation that built the man now crumbling under pressure. Before Shannon Sharpe became a household name before the viral podcast, Moments ESPN debates or the scandalous headlines, he was just a boy in Glenville, Georgia, struggling to survive in the thick heat of poverty and the shadows of the Deep South. Born on June 26, 1968, into a life few would envy. Shannon's story begins with pain and perseverance. He was raised by his grandmother Mary Porter, a woman whose strength defined his earliest understanding of love, discipline, and work. Shannon's father, Pete Sharpe, was largely absent, and his mother, Mary Alice Dixon, had her hands full trying to support her children. The Sharpe household, if you could call it that, was a modest structure surrounded by farmland where hard labor wasn't a choice, it was a requirement. Shannon and his siblings, including older brother Sterling Sharpe, who would also go on to NFL fame, grew up picking tobacco, hauling hay, and surviving on food stamps. Electricity was spotty, running water was inconsistent, and dreams of the NFL felt like fiction compared to the daily grind of feeding chickens and working fields. But what Shannon lacked in comfort, he gained in grit. He quickly learned that if he wanted anything in life, he would have to outwork everyone around him. In high school, he was awkwardly built underweight and constantly overlooked. He didn't have the polished technique or elite resources that wealthier athletes enjoyed. Coaches saw a kid with a loud mouth and a big personality, but few thought he'd make it past the small-town leagues. Even Shannon once admitted, "I was a terrible high school player." But he kept showing up, kept pushing, kept talking, and above all, he kept working. He followed his brother Sterling's path to Savannah State University, a historically black college where dreams were as big as they were underfunded. The facilities were humble and the spotlight dim, but Shannon found his fire there. Under coach Bill Davis, he became a standout. From 1987 to 1989, he racked up over 700 receiving yards and 40 touchdowns. The NCAA might have ignored him, but Savannah State fans knew they were watching greatness unfold. Still, NFL scouts were skeptical. At 6'2" and just over 220 pounds, Shannon was considered a tweener, not big enough for tight end, not fast enough for wide receiver. But he didn't care. In 1990, the Denver Broncos took a chance on him in the 7th round, 192nd overall. That was all Shannon needed, a sliver of a door. The first few years were brutal. Coaches didn't know what to do with him. Teammates called him country strong and mocked his southern twang. But Sharpe stayed persistent. He studied film obsessively. He refined his body and mind until he became a mismatch nightmare, too fast for linebackers, too strong for safeties. In 1992, his breakout came. Shannon became a starter, and from there, he never looked back. Over 14 seasons in the NFL. 12 with the Broncos, 2 with the Ravens. He redefined the tight end position. He earned 8 Pro Bowl selections, 3 Super Bowl rings, and in 2011 was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. When he gave his emotional induction speech, he dedicated it to his brother Sterling, who had his own brilliant career cut short by injury. Shannon said, "I'm the only player in the Hall of Fame who can say he was the second best player in his own family." That moment was pure, sharp, humble, raw, and deeply human. But behind the confidence and stats was still that boy from Glenville, the one who knew what it meant to sleep hungry, the one who saw his grandmother struggle to raise him with grace but no margin for error. And it was that boy who never really left. When he retired from football in 2003, many expected him to fade away like countless former athletes. But Shannon had other plans. His gift for language, his loud, unfiltered, take-no-prisoners commentary opened the door to a new arena: sports broadcasting. In 2004, he joined CBS's The NFL Today, but it wasn't until 2016 that he found his true second act. Paired with Skip Bayless on Fox Sports, Undisputed Shannon exploded in popularity. His colorful catchphrases, passionate monologues, and unapologetic takes turned him into a viral sensation. From his Hennessy and Black Milds skits to emotional rants about race politics and player respect, Sharpe became more than an analyst. He became a voice for a generation of sports fans who had been waiting for someone unafraid to speak truth, however messy it was. By 2023, Shannon had built a digital empire. His Club Shay Shay podcast regularly racked up millions of views. He launched other shows: Nightcap with Chad Johnson Club, 520, The Bubba Dub Show, all part of his independent media brand. His luxury cognac label Le Portier positioned him as a budding black entrepreneur. He was beloved, respected, and richer than ever. But here's where the story takes a turn. Because the same boldness that lifted him up, his refusal to filter himself, his passion for younger women, his brash approach to fame, would also plant the seeds for his unraveling. The fame, the money, the power, it all began to cloud the boy who once lived with so little. The traits that once made him unstoppable now made him impulsive. His dating life became a spectacle. His taste for social media models and women decades younger raised eyebrows, but no one could touch him until someone did. By 2024, whispers of Shannon's private life had grown into viral speculation. Comments he'd once made about women body parts and preferences that once passed as locker room humor now came back under scrutiny. And when Monique, yes, the same Monique who tried to warn him, called him out publicly again, it didn't come from hate. It came from heartbreak, because she had seen the boy from Glenville rise into a king and now watched that crown begin to slip. He conquered football and dominated the media world, but success comes with a price, and Shannon Sharpe may have ignored the warnings. So, how did a king of sports media end up facing lawsuits, backlash, and public humiliation? The rise was legendary, but the fall is just beginning. Let's trace his climb to fame in Part 3. When Shannon Sharpe walked away from the NFL in 2003, many assumed his time in the spotlight was over. A 3-time Super Bowl champion, 8-time Pro Bowler, and a future Hall of Famer, Shannon had already secured his legacy on the field. But for Shannon, greatness wasn't a destination. It was a mindset. Football had given him discipline, but media would give him voice. And in that voice, he found his true power. At first, his transition into broadcasting was rocky. In 2004, Shannon joined CBS's The NFL Today as an analyst. Though his football IQ was sharp, his delivery lacked polish. Critics dismissed him as too raw, too country, and too loud. He stumbled through segments, often appearing uncomfortable under studio lights. In truth, Shannon was still finding himself. But as always, he didn't quit. He studied veteran anchors, refined his speech, and adapted his natural charisma into something that worked for television. Still, it wasn't until a decade later that everything truly changed. In 2016, Fox Sports took a gamble. They launched Undisputed, a new debate-style sports talk show meant to rival ESPN's First Take. The show paired longtime provocateur Skip Bayless with Shannon Sharpe, an unfiltered, passionate, and deeply opinionated ex-athlete from the South. It was a pairing no one expected. But the chemistry was undeniable. From the first few episodes, Shannon proved he wasn't there to play it safe. He brought more than football takes. He brought culture flavor and a rawness rarely seen in sports media. Dressed in 3-piece suits, clutching Black and Milds and sipping cognac on air after big wins, Shannon broke every traditional broadcasting rule, and viewers couldn't get enough. His catchphrases became internet memes. His rants often peppered with slang and cultural references connected with fans who had never seen themselves represented in mainstream sports debates. But it wasn't just the style. Shannon's substance was real. Whether he was defending Colin Kaepernick's protests, criticizing the NFL's handling of domestic violence, or challenging racism in sports, Sharpe spoke from a place of lived experience. He wasn't reading a script. He was speaking truth. And that authenticity resonated. Soon, Undisputed became one of the most talked-about shows in sports media. Shannon's fan base exploded. He began trending on Twitter regularly. Celebrities started quoting him. Fans saw him not just as a commentator, but as a cultural voice, a rare blend of street wisdom, locker room realness, and intellectual depth. This rise gave Shannon the confidence to branch out. In 2020, he launched Club Shay Shay, a long-form podcast that allowed him to sit down with athletes, actors, musicians, and moguls. It became an instant hit. His episodes with guests like Deion Sanders, Steve Harvey, Floyd Mayweather, and Nique drew millions of views. The show gave Shannon space to be more than just a debater. He was now a storyteller, a host, and a cultural connector. But what made Club Shay Shay powerful wasn't just the guests. It was Shannon's vulnerability. He often opened up about his own childhood trauma, his challenges in the NFL, and his regrets as a father. He laughed with his guests. He cried. He got real. In one emotional episode, he shared how he still couldn't shake the shame of growing up poor, or how he carried guilt over not being more present for his children while chasing his career. Fans saw the man behind the muscles, and they loved him even more for it. By 2022, Shannon was everywhere. He had become a face of Fox Sports. He was an entrepreneur with his own cognac brand, Le Portier. He was a social media icon with viral clips circulating daily. And most importantly, he had leveraged his fame into ownership, producing his own shows, owning his content, and building a media empire. For a black man from rural Georgia who grew up in a house with no indoor plumbing, this was nothing short of revolutionary. And the empire kept expanding. He launched Nightcap, a looser, more humorous sports show alongside former NFL star Chad Ochocinco Johnson. Then came Club 520, a podcast featuring basketball insights and comedy. His production company began developing multiple digital series. He was no longer just a voice on someone else's platform, he was building his own. By early 2024, Shannon was in the final stages of negotiating a $100 million media deal that would centralize all of his content under one umbrella. The deal was expected to rival the likes of Pat McAfee's blockbuster contracts or Joe Rogan's Spotify empire. Shannon was poised to become the highest-paid black sports personality in the world. He had done it. From the cotton fields of Georgia to the digital throne of podcasting. But this was the moment things started to crack. With great fame came greater scrutiny. Fans who once cheered his brashness began noticing contradictions. On one hand, Shannon was preaching respect and integrity on air. On the other, he was bragging about extravagant dates, paying for women's divorces, and chasing 20-something influencers on Instagram. Some found it funny. Others found it troubling. Then came the first warning shot, Nique. During an episode of Club Shay Shay, the Oscar-winning actress and comedian appeared as a guest. During their candid conversation, she addressed Shannon's dating habits. "You don't need a 26-year-old girl," she said, half joking, half serious. "You need a grown woman who's going to love you, not your followers." Shannon laughed. He brushed it off. But the seed had been planted. In the months that followed, cracks in the foundation grew wider. Stories began circulating about Shannon's love life, including rumors about his relationships with much younger women, many of them content creators and influencers. Then came the lawsuit. A 19-year-old OnlyFans model named Gabriella Zuniga filed a $50 million complaint against Sharpe, alleging coercion manipulation and a disturbing racial fetish dynamic. Suddenly, everything changed. Clips resurfaced of Shannon bragging that he once paid for a woman's divorce because he believed she was the one. Fans began questioning why he could offer millions to settle a lawsuit but cap his own daughter's wedding budget at $30,000. Old text messages leaked filled with language that made fans uneasy. His outbursts on his podcast, once considered raw and real, began to feel more like signs of emotional unraveling. Nique, who had once warned him with love, now referenced the situation in her stand-up routines. The crowd laughed. Shannon didn't. His empire, once poised for a $100 million valuation, was suddenly unstable. Brands pulled back. Negotiations paused. And the man who had built his second act with unfiltered honesty was now being filtered out of deals, opportunities, and respect. Still, Shannon's rise remains one of the most inspiring in sports and media history. He took the pain of poverty and turned it into purpose. He redefined what it meant to be a black man on television. He gave voice to the voiceless, challenged the status quo, and stood up for what he believed in. That legacy is real. That impact is lasting. But even legends can fall. As the fame reached its peak, so did the pressure, and Shannon's choices behind the scenes were about to catch up to him in public. In Part 4, we'll uncover the dark truths, the leaked messages, and the unraveling of a legacy. For years, Shannon Sharpe's story had been one of resilience, hustle, and transformation. But behind the viral clips and championship rings, a darker narrative had been brewing, a personal unraveling that no amount of charisma could silence. It all came crashing down in early 2024 when Gabriella Zuniga, a 19-year-old OnlyFans model, filed a staggering $50 million lawsuit against Shannon Sharpe. The allegations were explosive claims of coercion, manipulation, and a disturbing racial fetish that left the public stunned. The story spread like wildfire, not just because of the claims, but because of who Shannon was supposed to be. At 55, Shannon had long built his post-NFL career on being real. He was the no-nonsense Southern man who spoke uncomfortable truths, who checked racism at the door, who uplifted black excellence on air. But now the same fans who had celebrated his boldness began to question his integrity. Leaked messages between Shannon and Gabriella painted a jarring picture. In one text, she allegedly wrote, "I want you to put a big black baby in me," a phrase many believed pointed to a disturbing power dynamic rooted in race play. Shannon never publicly addressed the language, but fans were quick to speculate this wasn't just fetishization, it was about control, identity, and contradiction. How could a man who preached empowerment engage in a relationship steeped in racial fantasy and dominance? Worse, insiders whispered that this wasn't a one-time thing. Allegedly, several women had similar experiences, stories that echoed with entitlement manipulation and a repeated pattern of dating much younger women, often from vulnerable or dependent circumstances. Nique saw it coming. In fact, she had warned him on his own show. Her words, "You don't need no 26-year-old girl," were clear. But Shannon, confident and perhaps arrogant, had laughed them off. He saw himself as untouchable. Yet when Nique later used his downfall as material in her stand-up, the laughter hit different. This time, it was public accountability wrapped in comedy. But the Gabriella lawsuit wasn't the only blow. In April 2024, just as Shannon was finalizing a groundbreaking $100 million media deal that would consolidate all of his shows, the lawsuit dropped. Sponsors who had once begged to partner with him went radio silent. Negotiations froze. Some investors even began to distance themselves entirely. According to Front Office Sports, the entire media contract was now under review, a phrase that in Hollywood often means we're out. And then came the backlash over his own daughter's wedding. In a podcast episode that might have slipped by unnoticed any other year, Shannon casually joked that he would cap his daughter's wedding budget at $30,000, saying they'd be eating fried fish and spaghetti. On the surface, it was humor. But fans connected it to the broader scandal. How could a man allegedly offering $10 million to a 19-year-old content creator be so frugal with his own daughter? The contradictions grew impossible to ignore. Then came the breakdown, at least publicly. On a Nightcap podcast episode during the 2025 NFL Draft, Shannon abruptly snapped at someone off camera, yelling, "Shut the fuck up!" The outburst, though short, caught fans off guard. It didn't sound like a bit. It sounded like a man under immense pressure cracking in real time. And in the court of public opinion, that clip said more than any interview could. But the spiral had even deeper roots. Insiders who had once praised Shannon's work ethic now described a man increasingly obsessed with control over his image, his relationships, his empire. Friends stopped returning calls. Collaborators became cautious. He started believing his own myth one former colleague allegedly shared. He thought the rules didn't apply to him. And it wasn't just friends pulling away, it was his audience. Many fans felt betrayed. This was the same man who railed against irresponsible athletes, who told young black men to move with purpose, who called out bad behavior with righteous anger. Now he was starring in his own cautionary tale. Even Shannon's past remarks, once chalked up to humor, were being re-examined. Stories of paying for a woman's divorce because he believed she was the one, or dating women decades younger, now came off less romantic, more problematic. One viral comment from a fan said it best. This man built his empire off accountability. And now he's running from it. And what about the racial element? Gabriella is a white woman. The texts, whether consensual or not, unleashed a firestorm about race, power, and desire. Prominent voices like Dr. Umar Johnson weighed in, saying Shannon's behavior was not just reckless, it was harmful. When black men engage in racial fantasy with white women, especially under transactional circumstances, Dr. Umar said in a viral clip, they reinforce dangerous power dynamics rooted in slavery, not love. Shannon's silence on these critiques spoke volumes. Still, the case is far from closed. Legal experts point out that Gabriella's claims may not hold up in civil court. There's no criminal charge, only a civil complaint. Some argue it's a cash grab. Others insist it doesn't matter. The damage to Shannon's reputation is done regardless of the outcome. Because this isn't just about whether Shannon Sharpe is guilty in the eyes of the law. It's about perception. And perception in entertainment is everything. Disney, which owns ESPN, doesn't care if Shannon is legally innocent. They care if his name trends for all the wrong reasons. They care if audiences associate his face with scandal, not strength. And right now, Shannon's brand is radioactive. Potential employers, sponsors, and partners are watching from a distance, unsure if he's worth the risk. The man who once inspired millions is now being studied like a cautionary case in ego, desire, and downfall. And the saddest part, it didn't have to end like this. Nique wasn't mocking him to be cruel. She was trying to save him from himself. The people who once laughed with Shannon were the same ones offering him lifelines. But somewhere along the way, he stopped listening. And now the empire he built with his own hands is wobbling. So what comes next for Shannon Sharpe? In the final part of this story, we'll look at whether redemption is possible and the emotional reckoning that might just be his final play for respect. There's a saying in sports, it's not how you fall, it's how you rise again. And for Shannon Sharpe, that fall has been loud, public, and deeply painful. But the final chapter of his story hasn't been written yet. Not by the media, not by the critics, and not by the scandal. Shannon rose from the red clay of Georgia, from tobacco fields and food stamps, to become a Hall of Famer, a cultural commentator, and a media mogul. His story inspired millions, especially black boys, who saw in him a mirror of their own struggle. He carried that weight with swagger, yes, but also with pride. And that makes the unraveling all the more heartbreaking. Because the truth is, Shannon Sharpe wasn't destroyed by lies. He was undone by truths he refused to face about the women he chased, the power he wielded, and the parts of himself he ignored. Nique tried to warn him not out of hate, but out of love. She saw a king playing with fire, and when the flames caught, she didn't laugh first, she sighed first. Now Shannon is standing at a crossroads. He can lash out at those who held up the mirror, or he can look into it. He can fade into scandal, or he can return to the core of who he was, the fighter, the student, the man who once said, "I never let where I came from define where I was going." This scandal doesn't erase the good he's done, but it forces a reckoning, not just with his image, but with his values. If Shannon wants redemption, it won't come from flashy comebacks or big money deals. It'll come from humility, from repair, from becoming the man his fans believed he was, long before the fame, the podcasts, and the headlines. At Legends of Black Excellence, we believe every legend deserves the chance to rise again, not because they are perfect, but because they are human. So what do you think? Does Shannon Sharpe deserve a second chance? Was Nique right to use the stage as a lesson instead of a roast? And more importantly, do you believe redemption is still possible in a world so quick to cancel, but so slow to understand? Let us know in the comments. Share your truth. And if you believe in honest stories about Black excellence, struggle, and survival, make sure to like this video, subscribe to Legends of Black Excellence, and turn on the bell so you never miss a moment like this. Because every legend has a shadow. But sometimes that shadow is exactly where the healing begins.